Welcome to the Clear Admit MBA Admissions Podcast. I'm Graham Richmond, and this is your wiretaps for Monday, March 21st, 2022. I'm joined by Alex Brown from Cornwall, England. Alex, how are things going?
Very good. Thank you, Graham.
So I don't know, I kind of, don't always look at this, but we've done 141 episodes now of wiretaps, which just seems, I can't even believe how many candidates we've profiled. And I just want to say, I always look forward to this time of the week. Like this is, I don't know, I always have a smile on my face when we get started recording, and it's just a lot of fun. And hopefully people listening feel that way too, but at least I'm having fun.
That's 141 weeks of wiretaps too, Graham. We haven't skipped a week.
That's right. I know. It's crazy. And yeah, we've done it in all kinds of weird, at least I have. I've recorded in so many different places. But yeah. And I know you've gone through, there was construction at your place and, dogs barking. We've done everything. So it's...
And dogs continue to bark.
Tell me what's been going on. I feel like last week was a complete whirlwind of decisions and stuff. But what did we see last week and what's coming up this week?
Yeah, we had some big hitters releasing round 2 decisions last week. At the top of the heap, sort of Duke, Darden, Ross. And what I find really interesting about that, Graham, is these are 3 schools certainly in the same tier, and 3 schools that I think are very sort of well matched in terms of competitively. So lots of candidates, might have heard from, Duke and Ross on the same day because they're applying to both schools. And so we saw a little bit of that. They get waitlisted to one, then they get admitted to another. So that's very good. Also, interestingly, one of the schools, there's a pretty interesting thread on ApplyWire regarding interview experience. So it really behooves schools to be very much on top of the process, especially when they're using alumni to interview in a virtual setting, and making sure they're not doing it when they're on a train journey or something like that.
That's what happened?
Or
you
at least that's what's been reported. I can't verify that it actually happened, but
right.
But at the end of the day, schools really do need to make sure they're on top of this stuff, because it's tough for applicants. But I would also then push back to applicants and recognize when you're doing a virtual interview, there could be distractions, and you've really got to cut through the noise and sort of stay calm and, whatever the right way to approach it is, but don't be unnerved by some less than usual settings, I should say.
Right. Now you're reminding me that you stay calm. I'm thinking of, all those T-shirts and things. Stay calm and keep interviewing.
Exactly.
Kind of, we need to stay calm and listen to wiretaps. That would be a good shirt. But going back to this interviewing thing, it's interesting because as I've been interviewing the admissions directors from all these schools, and by the way, we've got one coming up with Lisa Rios from NYU Stern. That was a lot of fun that I recorded the other day. But it's interesting because I ask them always like, how's your interview process work? And some of the schools use alums, and they routinely will say, we love the fact that our alums get this point of contact with, potential students, and the students get to, really interact with someone who's been through our program, and there's nothing that can match that kind of thing. But then when you talk to the schools who don't use alums, they say, we'd like to have better control over the process and consistency. And I think that's the trade-off, right? And if someone's interviewing someone from a train, that's not a good sign. And so, whatever school it is probably needs to rein in their alums a bit, give them the manual again on what can and cannot be can be done. So,
like you said, this is an ongoing issue.
Yeah.
But it's tough for candidates. And then you'll say candidates after the fact, because let's say they're placed on the wait list or they're not admitted, they're like, well, I should have reported the incident.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to do it before the decision. And now only doing it after the decision, I feel like, well, I'm only doing it because of sour grapes, so I'm just not going to do it at all. So schools become completely sheltered from this sort of feedback. They don't get it.
Right. And that's why I would say, if anyone ever does have an experience that they want us to convey to the schools, because we're in regular communication with the schools and we can do so anonymously, just send us an email, info@clearadmit.com. Tell us what happened and we can convey. If you just want the school to know about it without necessarily knowing that it was you, just so they can improve their process, that's fine. What's coming up this week?
What's really interesting, Graham, this year, I'm not saying this happens every year, but this year we seem to have quite a few what we call top 16 programs in that tier releasing decisions last week. More M7 programs releasing decisions this upcoming week, which includes Kellogg, Wharton, and Booth. And then the following week, it's Harvard and Stanford. So we're seeing from week to week an increase in the sort of the tiers that are releasing decisions. And I just think that's fascinating, because if you've got great news this week, maybe you get better news next week, and then even better news the following week. And how does that go? Or vice versa, obviously. But I mean, this isn't completely consistent. There are obviously other programs releasing decisions next week that wouldn't be in the M7. I mean, Anderson, Georgetown's next week, and so on and so forth. But there seems to be a little bit of a pattern there this season. So yeah, very, very interesting. We've got still a couple of weeks of lots of decisions to come out.
Yeah, I love watching them come out. So we'll stay tuned to LiveWire and see as this all unfolds. And obviously people will then be heading to DecisionWire to indicate all their results and where they're going to go, or whether they're undecided and want our advice or other community members' advice. So over on the website, I'll try to be brief here because we have some candidates to get through in the wiretaps portion here. But on the website, we did a couple of real humans. One is a woman who named Stephanie Sorensen. She went to Chicago Booth, graduated in 2020, and now works at Disney. And she's kind of an interesting story because she was kind of a more mid-career and did the evening and weekend program at Booth, I believe. So that's kind of a different twist on the Real Humans alumni piece. We also did one with a woman named Sanchita Shandilia. I think I'm pronouncing that right. She is an Insead grad from 21, so a very recent Insead grad from India originally, and she ended up going to Bain. And she talks a lot about the one-year experience and, kind of why she chose Insead, and I believe it was the only school that she applied to. She also had a piece of advice in the article, and I encourage everyone to just read these pieces, but she gave a piece of advice that I thought was great, which was about the importance of your resume or CV and how it's a really great starting point as you embark on the process of applying to business school, which, Alex, I know you and I have talked about before, so I thought that was kind of cool.
And something we're going to discuss in the Admissions Academy, Graham.
Yes, yeah. So everyone should stay tuned. But Alex and I have some very cool news coming with respect to a little Admissions Academy that we're going to be producing. So stay tuned there. The other thing, Alex, is we did some more career placement outcomes pieces, one about consulting and one about entrepreneurship. And for those of you, tuning in, if you're reading these pieces, we basically aggregate all the career placement outcome reports from the top 20, or I guess it's maybe 28 business schools in America. They all have certain reporting standards. So we're able, in most cases, to kind of piece everything together and draw some conclusions. And so, consulting being such a big industry, we did a whole piece on that and where people land. And then we also did something similar for entrepreneurship. So I don't know if you've been reading those, Alex. I know you like them. So
No, I think they're absolutely brilliant. What did you learn from the consulting piece, Graham?
Well, I learned that there's really inconsistent reporting when it comes to MBB placements. So some schools, Chicago, Kellogg, they're literally telling you, like, we sent this many people to McKinsey, this many to Bain, and you can literally just add this stuff up and see what percentage of all the consulting placements are MBB, which is kind of an interesting metric to look at. But then other schools like Wharton or Harvard, they'll just say, they either tell you nothing, they'll just give you the broad category of consulting as a percentage of the placements that they had, or they'll have a stat like, at this company on the list, more than 2 people went there. And I think that's Wharton. So Wharton has, it's like, we sent 2 people or more to McKinsey, which isn't really useful information. Like, I'd want to know the number. And so I don't know, it's just interesting to see. And it doesn't seem to be bound by school rank or anything, because you have Booth and Kellogg doing it. You also have Duke, I think, and maybe Michigan doing it. But then, other schools are not. So I don't know why that is.
Yeah, it's a shame, because quite honestly, if you could really get a good sense of the percent that go to MBB, to me, that's as revealing as on the finance side, the percent that go to buy side.
Yeah, exactly.
That's that's a really good proxies for which are the best schools on the landscape. So hopefully better reporting in the future there, Graham.
Yeah, and you'll see in the consulting piece, one thing that's interesting is you see that most people who go into consulting from, say, MIT Sloan go to MBB.
Yeah.
Which is not the case for a lot of other schools, right? So it's just interesting to see these nuances. But of course, MIT is a small small class, and they don't send as many people to consulting as some of the bigger schools, right? Just in raw numbers. But in any event, it's really fascinating to look at this stuff. Speaking of employment, we did run a whole story about UT Austin McCombs because they just published their placement stats. And so I'll just give you the real quick numbers there. They had 94% of candidates who were looking for employment landing a job within 3 months. And that's actually up from 88% in 2020. So the job market is, really hot right now. Schools are not having trouble placing their grads. $130,000 median salary, $25,000 signing bonus as an average for those who received a bonus. And then when we get to the sort of industry stuff, tech led the way for UT Austin. 34% of those seeking employment and getting a job ended up in tech, 23% to consulting, 17% to finance. And then, the regional stuff's pretty interesting and maybe as you would expect, but you have 66% staying in the Southwest, so Texas and anywhere kind of Arizona, all that stuff. The West is 13%. So if you add those two together, you quickly get up into really high numbers here, right? Because 66 plus 13 is 79%. So almost 80% of the class is like staying kind of West Coast or Southwest. 7% go to the Midwest, 5% Northeast, 3% South, 2% Mid-Atlantic, and less than 2% go work outside of the U.S. So any thoughts, Alex, on UT Austin McCombs numbers here?
Yeah, the numbers just support the idea that if you want to work in Texas in the long run, go to UT Austin, McCombs. They're one of the programs, to me, if you look at all the top sort of 20 programs, they're one of the few that really, really concentrates in its region in terms of placement. I think that thing, and obviously they've got a burgeoning tech sector down in Texas. So that plays well for them too. But they do place also on the West, and I always see a little bit of overlap between folks applying to UT Austin, McCombs, and UCLA Anderson. In that regard.
Yeah, that's true. There is that overlap, and like the sort of NYU's, UCLA's, Texas, they all have this very kind of regionally focused placement stats. Very heavy in their region. So we continue to see that. I think that's all I had before we get into the candidates. I did want to say that we'll probably get on Clubhouse, not this week, but probably next week after we've had the bulk of the big decisions come out, so that we can chat with some of our loyal listeners and hear kind of what's been happening to them in terms of decisions. I'm thinking of a few people in particular who I know were on like wait lists or ended up applying to some additional schools in round 2, and so I'll be curious. Hopefully, we'll get together with some of our regular Clubhouse folk and hear all about that. So stay tuned. We'll keep you posted. We'll get word out on the website as to exactly when we're going to do it, but it should be next week. Anything else from you, though, Alex, before we move into the candidates?
Now let's kick on.
All right. So this is Wiretap's candidate number 1. So we're going to start off this week with an ApplyWire entry, and this candidate is looking to start in the fall of 2023. So they're kind of an early bird candidate. They have 10 schools on the target list, and those schools include Columbia, Cornell, Dartmouth, Duke, Georgetown, Kellogg, NYU, UT Austin, UVA, and Vanderbilt. And this person's been working in business development and marketing. They want to get into consulting or maybe consumer goods after business school, and they do mention a couple of consulting firms like Accenture and McKinsey as possible targets. Their GPA is a 3.3. It's out of the what they claim to be the best undergraduate business school in Canada, because this candidate is a woman who is from Canada, born and raised in Toronto, and they have 3 years of work experience. They want to land in the northeast of the U.S., and they haven't yet taken the GMAT. They mentioned that they're not a great standardized test taker. And they had a little bit of an exchange with you, Alex, as you kind of got into it with them on, some of their questions about the process. But what do you make of this candidate? Because, Canadian female, 3.3, we don't know what the GMAT's going to be. But what's your kind of initial thinking here for this early bird?
Yeah, I assume, Graham, they talk about Rotman, University of Toronto, in terms of the best business school.
I'm not sure which one they would say it is, because I feel like I think of, Richard Ivey, Queen's, and Rotman. Those are the three big business schools in Canada that I think of. So it must be one of them, but I'm not sure which one.
Yeah. No, very good. But I only asked because I'm actually doing a little bit of work for Rotman.
Oh, wow.
Just an hour of work, so it's not like I'm going to work for them.
Right.
But no, very good, very good. Yeah, I mean, we talked about this before we came on air. A 3.3 from a Canadian business school is probably not a bad GPA, given that they're given the lack of grade inflation or less grade inflation in Canada.
Yeah.
So hopefully that's not a big issue. But it really does put some pressure on taking the GMAT. And I know that she declares that she's not a good standardized test taker. But obviously preparing as well as she can and really targeting, if she can, that sort of 700 level would be great. And make sure she takes the GMAT with enough time to retake the GMAT.
Yeah.
As we know, a lot of candidates ultimately take the test 2 or 3 times. The work experience is probably quite good. I mean, it's sales and business development. I like the business development aspect. So if she can show growth and impact in that area, I think that will be very good. And yeah, I mean, she could be a pretty strong candidate overall. I mean, in terms of extracurriculars, I think she was quite busy during her undergrad in terms of involvement and so forth, has not had that level of involvement since then, but there may be opportunities to seek out or carve out a niche in terms of supporting women's issues, either at work in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion activity, or even in their local area. There might be things that she could be doing.
Right.
But overall, Graham, I think, a pretty strong candidate here, an early bird candidate who, if she can get that sort of GMAT score that puts her in play at top schools, I think she clearly could be a high caliber profile.
Yeah, and I want to just say 2 things about her. Number one, her work is in the food and beverage space, so she works with kind of a small food and beverage company, and that's kind of interesting. Whenever you're working with a product that people touch, I think you can sometimes. It's interesting as the admissions reader to kind of read about this stuff. So I feel like there could be some stuff there that makes her. Kind of stand out a little bit. It's not your kind of traditional path necessarily. So I feel like that's a feather in her cap. And I want to go back to what you said. I mean, she's early in the process, right? And she hasn't taken the test, but right now she has like 6 months before the deadlines. And so I would take the test soon, like prep for it and, take it in the next couple of months so that, as you said, she has time to take it again. And I would argue that, I'm someone who's terrible at these kinds of tests. I did not like, taken the GMAT. I mean, it was, I studied for it, took it, and did not get a good score. But I then, buckled down and I just literally, I went and took like a class and forced myself to literally spend, an hour a day for 6 weeks on the test. And every weekend took a full length timed test, and then by the time I got to the real test, it was just sort of old hat. So, for retaking it. So I think it's really possible to do well, even if you don't like it. It's learnable, and I know GMAT might, and even ETS would tell us otherwise. Oh no, this is kind of just measuring your aptitude, but you can learn how to do well on these tests, and she has time to do it. That's the beauty here. It's not like we're in September and she's got to take the test and live with whatever score she's got. So I think she's going to be competitive. I mean, I think, there's a lot going for her. As you said, she was really active as an undergrad. She just needs to kind of pick it up right now and look for opportunities to do some outside activities. I also wondered if she has some hobbies and things that she's not mentioning here, because those count too. It's not just, So again, I think this is a good candidate, and she's got plenty of time to be a great candidate if she puts her mind to it.
Yeah, and in that regard, Graham, there's no urgency. If she can't get all the ducks in a row in round 1, she's going to be just as competitive in round 2.
Yes.
So again, back to this needing to retake the test just to squeeze another 10 or 20 points. Maybe split the apps over round 1 and round 2. And so on and so forth. But if you're not from an overrepresented population, you have a little bit more freedom in terms of which rounds to target.
Right.
Not round 3, but rounds 1 and 2.
Yeah, I will say, I mean, she has a really wide range of schools from arguably Columbia or Kellogg at the top end with respect to admissions competitiveness, down to maybe Vanderbilt at the lower end of that spectrum. So, she probably can narrow that down once she knows what her score is and we get closer to the deadlines. She's not going to apply to 10 schools, right. And she probably will only apply to a few in the first round, or maybe she waits for round 2. I do want to say that if she's serious about Columbia, probably applying early decision makes a lot of sense for them because, that's a good option. And especially if she's not, kind of hitting the ball out of the park with the test and wants to kind of get an early edge. But I recognize it's binding and that might cut off other paths to some of these other great schools. So that's something she'll have to debate. But it's an interesting, she's got a lot to do. And so she just got to keep her head down and get working on it.
Great point on Columbia early decision. If you want to be admitted by Columbia, there is an advantage to be in early decision.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to thank her for posting. Great to see these profiles. And let's move on and talk about Wiretap's candidate number 2. So this is another ApplyWire entry. This candidate is also looking at fall of 23 and has 5 schools on the target list. Those schools are Duke, Emory, UNC, UT Austin, and UVA Darden, so a kind of a southeast focus. They've been working in the kind of aerospace defense contractor space, although more in a kind of a functional role that's, I guess, a bit... I feel like it was operations, or we'll get into it, but it's not, they're not an engineer or something. They're in the kind of business side of things. They want to get into either consumer goods or maybe aerospace again, or pharma. They seem to have an open mind post-MBA at this point. They mentioned Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, Procter & Gamble, Siemens. So they have a lot of target companies. They maybe still have a little bit of work to do in terms of where they want to be, in terms of the industry. Their GMAT score is a 690. And that's, I believe they've taken it 4 times. So I think they're ready to hang up the towel on, working on that test score. GPA is a 3.54. It comes from a top 20 public university. And let's see, 3 years of work experience. They're located in Florida and they want to land in the Southeast, as you probably could tell from their school selection. The last thing I'll mention, Alex, before I turn it over to you and let you kind of weigh in is they wrote a really nice note in their post where they said, "Hi, Graham and Alex, I'm so excited to finally be applying to business school. I've actually been listening to the podcast since I graduated from undergrad in 2019. So this is definitely surreal to be posting this." And they go on to say, "Thanks for your insights. And I love the podcast. It's helped me to discern so much since I started working after college." So I want to thank them for tuning in for that long. They probably deserve a medal or something. But it's really cool that they're now at the application phase, and they're probably going to be a real expert if they've listened to all these episodes and so many different candidates, sort of like the case method, right? So, but what do you make of this?
Do you think they've listened to 141 episodes, Graham?
God, I really hope not. I mean, that would be...
that would be...
Yeah. Well, we should send them a T-shirt.
Yeah.
But no, it's an interesting, thing though, because I do feel like if they have listened to that many, that means they've literally heard, several hundred real profiles be assessed, and that's got to help them in the long run.
Yeah,
so, but what do you make of this candidate though? Because I know you had some back and forth with them.
Yeah, I like this candidate. I mean, obviously, I seem to like all candidates, but their work experience seems solid. I'm not sure that you could read this and be wowed, but certainly very looks like good, meaty work experience. Like you say, not on the engineering side of aerospace and so forth, but more in the sort of business end of the business, which is... That's what MBAs are about, right? With the business function of the business. So looking at contracts, pricing, and they've shown progress. There's more complexity in terms of the work that they're doing, and presumably the clients that they're working on, or contracts they're working on, and so on and so forth. So I do like that. Their GPA is very solid, sort of right in the sort of median for top programs. I don't think they're overly ambitious in terms of their target schools. No. I mean, they're good schools, no doubt, but they have a nice focus in terms of they want to be in the Southeast. So it makes sense, right, to see Duke and Emory, Keenan Flagler, McCombs, we talked about at the beginning of this, is sort of more Texas area, but nevertheless and makes sense. And Darden, right? So their school selection, I think, is I think very appropriate for what we're looking at here. There's going to be some concern about the GMAT. For these schools, it's certainly within range, but probably 10 or 20 points below the median. So because it's within range, that's good. They really do need to show that there's going to be no academic issue. And again, hopefully their GPA confirms that. There's one little wrinkle there in terms of they failed a calculus class, Graham, and then they retook it, and then they got an A in the retake. So to me, that seems quite a leap, right, from a failure to an A. But do you think they need to address that, or should they just leave the AdCom up to the AdCom to sort of observe it?
I think they should address it only because I know when I used to look at transcripts, I would kind of quickly scroll through, look at the courses, and if there was an F or a fail like that, I would be looking for that.
Yeah.
And so it'll jump out at me, and then I'd say, wow, why did they fail calculus? Gee, that's kind of a building block. And I may not right away find the A that they got in calculus later. I mean, I may not know to look for that, or so I think it would be better for them to just come out and say, I took calculus, I was not ready for it, and and they mentioned they kind of realized they probably should have withdrew at some point, and because they were overwhelmed, but they didn't, they stuck with it, and they got, they failed, and so then they retook it, but they got an A. So I feel like all's well that ends well. Like they did get an A in calc, and their GPA is fine. They went to a good school. Yeah, I just think they need to be out in front on it. They didn't share this, but I would like to know, what are those percentiles on the GMAT? Because I would be, if the quant percentile is really weak, that could be a red flag, right? So, but we don't know.
No, I agree with you on that, but I would imagine with their GPA, they're going to show a pretty good amount of quant in their undergrad, and their work experience is probably quite heavily quant focused, which will help. I'm going to ask you another question, Graham. I like this person's extracurriculars. There's, one of the things that we like about extracurriculars, or when I say we, I'm talking about AdCom, is it shows that the person's more well-rounded. It shows that the person will contribute and engage outside of work and so on and so forth. So to me, that's all very positive. Sometimes our advice to offer is don't talk about religion, politics, and money, Graham. Again, I'm thinking back to our Admissions Academy work that we're putting together.
Right.
This person's extracurriculars are about religion. Why don't you address that and perhaps provide a little bit of guidance here?
Yeah. So first of all, I think they have really strong extracurriculars. So one of the things they do is they volunteer each month at a food bank. And the other thing they do is they helped create and are now a leader for their church's young adult group. So it's people between 20 and 30 who, are getting together, meeting regularly and stuff. So this is fine. I think, you don't want to proselytize in your applications, but just as it's same with politics, right? If you're working for a Democrat or a Republican, it shouldn't be so much about taking a stance on an issue in your application, like trying to convince people that, gun control is important or abortion is bad or, whatever your point of view might be. Like that's a no-no. The same way you wouldn't tell people that being Christian is, really important or something, right? But talking about the nuts and bolts of like, oh, I created this group, I'm now leading it, and there are, whatever it is, 20, 30, 40 members, and we get together regularly, and it's created a network, and, that's all fine. And I mean, look, every business school has different faith groups on campus that people belong to. Some people are religious, some people aren't, and there's, just the way that a school is going to have a running club or whatever, like there's something for everyone, and each school needs people for each of these clubs. So I don't have a problem with this person's ECs being religious based. I think it's, it sounds like they're doing great stuff. And so as long as they're not, kind of proselytizing, it's fine.
Yeah. And I couldn't agree more. And you focus on a couple of things, they set it up, they led it, and there's impact as a result of this initiative. So if you can check those three, setting it up, leading, impact, absolutely fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, like I like this candidate. I think that, the GMAT it's not great, but I feel like, like you said, they have a reasonable list of target schools. I did mention you before we came on air that I wondered about whether or not it would be smart to have a Vanderbilt or a Georgetown in the mix here. Just given, if you look at the placements and, there could be some logic to that. I don't know. I mean, but they have a good list, and frankly, it's, Duke probably sits at the top of that list with Darden, but they also have Emory and UNC, which have slightly better admissions odds as a rule. So, I feel like they're doing all the right things. It's obvious to me that they've listened to a lot of Wiretaps episodes.
Yeah, they must have done. Absolutely fantastic.
But what about the goals? Like right now, talk about the goals.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other issue. And we talked about this directly on ApplyWire. Just make sure these goals are focused. And whether it's by industry or whatever it might be, you want to come across as someone that's really thought through why they're getting the MBA, why at that school, and what their pathway is going to look like in the short run, i.e. where you want to recruit directly after the program, as well as in the sort of medium long run, in terms of what is your impact in sort of business and society in the long run, and how's all that going to map together. So this person could focus their goals a little bit more. This is, someone with 3 years of experience, generally that does correlate with less focused goals. And the more you work, the more focused you are in terms of what your future is going to be, and so on and so forth. And they have time, again, just like our first candidate, over the next several months to really focus and fine-tune their pathway going forward.
Yeah. And the last thing I was going to say about them is they mentioned, like, after business school, they'd love to work in supply chain or strategy. So that's the function. And so I think they should pick one. And, either is fine. I think supply chain is kind of interesting in that it obviously maps to a very clear kind of major, like I'm going to do operations, and it's less common than just strategy, which could be consulting. And then they also say either CPG or healthcare. Again, I would just pick one. When I think about their school list, obviously a Duke's really good for healthcare. Actually, Vanderbilt's pretty good for healthcare. They should think about, they want to be in the Southeast. So what companies are there and available to them, given the placement does tend to fall in the region. So it's just something to think about. But I feel like they have time to put that together, and they've listened to enough episodes to not need to have us tell them that. So I think they'll be fine.
Should they include a Kellogg or another M7 into the mix, just to make sure that they've absolutely maximized their opportunities?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I could see if the application was incredibly compelling. I mean, they have great extracurriculars, solid undergrad, interesting work. If the goals come together around a nice, I could see a Kellogg, taking a flyer just to see, or even a Wharton, given that those are the two big kind of healthcare programs. So yeah, I wouldn't rule it out. I mean, I think they could always, try some schools in round one, see where that leaves them and stuff.
I mean, if they're admitted to Duke, right?
Yeah.
Then they get admitted across the board.
Right.
They'd have to wonder, did they aim high enough, right?
Yeah.
So
right.
That's the advantage of, you should take a flyer in this case. And if you don't get admitted, you should feel perfectly fine about that. At least you'll know when you go to Duke or whichever school is the case here, you gave it all your best shot, and Duke's a great opportunity.
Yeah.
So
agreed.
So I'm a big fan of taking a flyer for sure.
Yeah. All right. So I want to thank that person not only for tuning in over the years here, but also for submitting their profile. A lot of fun to discuss. Let's move on and talk about Wiretaps candidate number 3. So this is a DecisionWire entry. This person doesn't know where to go. They applied to Berkeley, Kellogg, NYU, Stanford, UCLA, and Wharton. And they ended up with acceptances at Stern, UCLA, which is actually giving them a $150,000 scholarship, and Wharton. And they're going to start this fall. They want to work in consulting most likely, and they mentioned, BCG and McKinsey. I think they're also a little bit open to tech, it sounds like, because they had Microsoft on the list of possible targets as well. They had a 7.10 on the GMAT and a 3.4 GPA. So pretty good results, right? I mean, they got into some good schools. They're located in San Francisco, and they mentioned that they have a consortium fellowship for UCLA. So they're really trying to decide, between whether they go to UCLA with basically a free ride or Wharton with no money. And they mentioned, well, this is really tough because Wharton is my dream school, but I'm not sure if it makes sense to put myself in massive debt help. So what do you make of this? And talk a little bit about what was said on the site, because a bunch of folks weighed in, yourself, Elliot, and then one of our community members who's got 3 stars and is, a long history of providing great advice. So what do you make of this one?
Yeah, not only a long history of providing great advice, but our most starred contributor
Yes.
in the lifetime of the Wires.
That's right.
So yeah, I mean, the advice. I mean, I love Elliot's point of view. Not in this post, but they'd done a previous post when they didn't have the additional money from Anderson, and he called it the regret factor. If Wharton is your dream school and you choose not to go to Wharton when you have been offered admissions there, then are you going to be regretting that decision? Is there going to be a buyer's remorse, or whatever the psychological term is for that? And I got to think that absolutely captures the essence of this person's sort of considerations. So yeah, getting a full ride at Anderson, absolutely fantastic. If this person knew that they wanted to remain on the West Coast, or more certainly if they wanted to be in LA, I'd be like, take the money and run. Absolutely fantastic. But they don't know that. They want the flexibility of New York City and maybe Texas from where they are, or LA. And to me, that makes Wharton much more of a viable choice. I mean, I don't know what their tolerance for debt is and their access to, that. So that's going to be a personal decision on their stand. But I got to think 10 years out of school, if they could have dealt with the debt 10 years out of school as a Wharton alum, their opportunities are going to be a little bit better than 10 years out of school as an Anderson alum. And obviously I'm a little bit biased because I know what that 10 years out of Wharton can look like. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think the majority of the conversation is steering this candidate to Wharton. They came back to the site because they got more money from Anderson, but I still think that folks were generally favorable to Wharton in this case.
Yeah, it's a really interesting, debate, and the one of the commenter that you mentioned, who's our kind of highest ranked member of the community, they have 383 likes on their post.
Nearly as many as you, Graham.
Yeah, I know. And they said, I generally lean to taking the dollars over rank in most situations, as I feel people get too caught up in the rankings and prestige game when their goal is achievable, from their other admits. But I start to favor Wharton in your case, they said. So I think, it is true. It's, as Elliot said, you don't want to regret the decision. And I think the things that jumped out at me, I'll be really brief here, is number one, they called Wharton their dream school. Yeah. It's hard to walk away from your dream. Number two, they mentioned they don't want to be stuck out west. And, we look at the placement stats and, obviously there are a lot of people landing out west who go to UCLA. So that's something to keep in mind.
Some of that will be self-selection.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Just to be sure.
Yeah.
But that's where your network's going to be.
Right. And then, the third point out is the MBB. They talk about wanting to maybe work at MBB as a strong possibility. And so obviously Wharton probably gets the nod there. And then, they mentioned like other top firms that they might want to go to. And again, the Wharton network and stuff. And the last thing I was going to say is, I don't know if they've done it, but they should ask Wharton to whether they can do anything on the money front. They say, look, I really want to come to Wharton. It's been my dream, but I now have $150,000 on the table from Anderson. And I recognize Anderson's not as highly ranked as Wharton, but I would really appreciate if the committee could consider, some kind of financial aid here.
Yeah.
So you never know what's going to happen. If you do it politely in writing, you don't just call them up, you write a nice letter explaining, maybe they'll get some money and that could make the decision easier. But I think, it's an interesting quandary. So
yeah, I mean, I would consider it a 2-tier gap between Anderson and Wharton.
Sure.
So it is a pretty considerable gap, and I think I cannot agree more with your commentary there.
Yeah. So I want to thank that person for sharing this dilemma because we had a lot of good comments on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, and obviously, Alex, thanks for picking these out as you always do. We've done it again, gone through our 3 candidates and all the latest news and notes from the MBA admissions front. But we'll do it all next week. And yeah, I want to just remind everyone who's listening, please remember to rate and review the show. It really helps us to attract additional listeners and to keep the show going every week. So please, rate, review, tell anybody you know to tune in. We always love to have more listeners. So thanks, Alex, though. We'll see you in 1 week's time, I guess.
Yeah, brilliant. Stay safe, everyone. Best of luck. Take care.